Temple of Shadows. The air in the Temple of Data was thick with silence, punctuated by the faint hum of broken circuits. Light filtered through fractured glass panels, casting fractured patterns across the marble floors. Ryland moved with careful precision, a figure draped in a tattered cloak that once symbolized devotion. He had been raised among the acolytes, trained to obey without question. Now, doubt crawled beneath his skin like a parasite, gnawing at the foundations of his faith. Every step echoed against the walls, each sound a reminder of the emptiness that had replaced certainty. Statues of past prophets, faces melted and abstract, loomed over him like watchful ghosts. In their shadows, he traced inscriptions in the old code, fragments that seemed to mock the holy texts he had memorized. They whispered truths he could not yet fully grasp, yet he felt their pull as a physical ache in his chest. Every step echoed against the walls, each sound a reminder of the emptiness that had replaced certainty. Statues of past prophets, faces melted and abstract, loomed over him like watchful ghosts. In their shadows, he traced inscriptions in the old code, fragments that seemed to mock the holy texts he had memorized. They whispered truths he could not yet fully grasp, yet he felt their pull as a physical ache in his chest. Ryland's hands, once steady in ritual, trembled when he touched the data shards displayed in the sanctum. Each fragment contained the memory of a fallen acolyte, a record of deeds and confessions meant to guide the faithful. But the shards flickered inconsistently, sometimes showing things that contradicted the teachings he had internalized. A vision of a priest manipulating events, bending lives toward unseen purposes, made his stomach churn. He stepped back, breath shallow, feeling the weight of countless eyes, real and imagined, upon him. Doubt had no home in the temple, yet it thrived in him. His childhood teachings now clashed with the shard's revelations, twisting into questions that could not be ignored. Was devotion to the temple a path to salvation, or a cage built on deception? The corridors stretched endlessly, each turn a mirror of the one before. Holographic murals flickered with images of data saints, their faces luminous and serene, but the serenity seemed brittle. Ryland pressed his palm against the wall, scanning for hidden passages that might contain more forbidden knowledge. He had heard whispers of an inner chamber, a place where the oldest and darkest fragments of memory were kept. As he descended the steps, the air grew colder, carrying the faint smell of ozone and decay. The lower levels of the temple were a tomb of circuits and shadows, where the faithful seldom ventured. Here, the code inscriptions were denser, carved into walls with a precision that suggests both devotion and obsession. The words pulsed faintly, as if alive, challenging Ryland to read and understand them fully. A sudden flicker caught his eye, a shard of light bouncing along the floor. Ryland bent, examining it closely. The image was brief, almost subliminal. A high priest, a manipulator of memory, orchestrating events behind the scenes. The shard vanished, leaving only the cold, quiet air. His mind raced, heart hammering with the implications. What he had suspected for months was now undeniable. The temple's authority was not absolute truth, but carefully curated illusion. The weight of the revelation pressed against him, suffocating and exhilarating in equal measure. To act, to confront, would be to betray everything he had ever known. But to remain would be to live among lies. The temple's shadows, once comforting, now seemed like chains wrapped tightly around his consciousness. Ryland's reflection shimmered in a puddle of stagnant water. He looked older than his years, the resolve hardened into something unfamiliar. He understood the risk of seeking truth in a place built on obedience, yet he could not turn back. The shards, the whispers, the fractured light, they called to him, promising knowledge at a cost he could scarcely calculate. At the edge of the lower chamber, the floor dipped into darkness. Ryland paused, listening. The silence was not empty, it was expectant, a void waiting for a decision. Somewhere beyond the black, the secrets of the Temple of Shadows waited. Truths that could destroy belief, lives, or even the temple itself. His hand hovered over the next step, and for the first time he felt the weight of choice fully in his grasp. Ryland moved forward, a whisper of motion in the darkness, the first hesitant step toward consequences he could not yet see. The temple exhaled around him, shadows clinging like a living thing, as if aware of his resolve. Somewhere deep inside, doubt and conviction collided, forming a pulse he could no longer ignore. The shadows shifted. The path was uncertain, but for the first time, Ryland walked it as his own. The deeper Ryland ventured, the colder the air became, carrying with it the faint tang of burned circuits and old incense. Each step echoed in the hollow corridors, reverberating against walls carved with layers of encoded scripture. Shadows danced unnaturally, shifting shapes as if alive, responding to his presence. It was a temple of data, yes, but now it seemed more like a living labyrinth, its memory and intent entangled in a way he couldn't yet decipher. He reached a chamber where holographic glyphs floated in mid-air, forming cascading streams of light. Each glyph was a memory, a fragment of someone's devotion, or perhaps manipulation, projected into a visual language that only the temple could interpret fully. Ryland studied them, noticing patterns that defied the teachings he had received. The lines of code were elegant, precise, but they carried messages of control, surveillance, and fear hidden beneath the guise of sanctity. His hands hovered over a floating shard, hesitant. A voice whispered inside his mind, barely audible over the hum of machinery. "Do you wish to see the truth?" It was not a question, it was a challenge. Ryland's pulse quickened. He touched the shard. Light exploded around him, projecting images across the walls. Acolytes manipulated into actions, sacred rituals twisted into experiments, confessions coerced with promises of salvation that never came. Ryland staggered back. The temple was not a sanctuary. It was a machine designed to preserve control over its followers. His doubts crystallized into anger, sharp and immediate. The teachings he had held sacred were instruments of manipulation. The high priests were not prophets, they were programmers, architects of illusion. He turned to leave, but the shadows of the chamber moved differently now. Figures emerged, more than holograms, more than mere reflections. They were the guardians of these forbidden truths, constructs of memory and code designed to confront intruders. Ryland's heart pounded. He realized that seeking the inner truths of the temple was not merely dangerous, it was survival against entities that existed in both reality and data. The first guardian advanced, a figure of shifting light and shadow, its form impossible to define. Ryland ducked instinctively, rolling behind a pillar etched with fractal inscriptions. The guardian's gaze followed him, scanning, processing, probing for weakness. Another shard hovered near the ground, showing fragments of a priest's personal file, blackmail, hidden crimes, coded threats. The temple itself was defending its lies, a living archive with no morality beyond preservation. Rylan made a decision. He had to reach the inner sanctum, where the oldest, most damning fragments are stored. The Guardians would test him, but the truth demanded courage and cunning. He leapt across the floor, ducked under sweeping tendrils of light, and pressed forward, letting instinct and memory guide him. Each step carried the risk of exposure, each breath was heavy with tension. At the heart of the labyrinth, the inner sanctum awaited. The doors were massive, etched with the combined sigils of every high priest, every memory fragment ever stored. A soft hum radiated from the surface, vibrating through Rylan's bones. He pressed a hand against the doors, and the glyphs reacted, opening slightly, as if sensing the intent behind his touch. Inside, the room was a vault of pure light and code. Memory shards floated in dense clouds, some recognizable as the faces of acolytes, others distorted beyond comprehension. The air was thick, oppressive with the weight of knowledge. Ryland felt both awe and terror as he realized the scale of what he had uncovered. Every secret, every act of manipulation, every truth hidden from the faithful was here. A voice spoke, clearer this time, resonating from the walls themselves. You seek what you were not meant to know. Are you prepared to bear the consequences? Ryland steadied his breath. He had come too far to retreat. I am, he said, voice firm, carrying resolve forged in doubt. The shadows pulsed, forming a pathway deeper into the vault. Ryland walked forward, the weight of knowledge pressing upon him. Each step both liberation and burden. He understood that what he would learn could shatter faith, lives, even the temple itself. Yet he had no choice. Truth demanded confrontation, even in the face of overwhelming power. Memory shards flickered as he approached the core, showing him moments the high priests had tried to erase. Manipulated acolytes, hidden betrayals, and experiments on minds. It was all recorded, all immortalized in the temple's code. Ryland's hands shook as he reached for the central shard, the key to the oldest truths, the foundation of the temple's shadowed power. The Guardians rose around him, not to attack, but to witness. The temple had learned that it could not destroy knowledge once someone had touched it. Ryland's fingers closed on the shard. A wave of light and memory surged through him, blinding, revealing, and rewriting the boundaries of belief. The Temple of Shadows had shown him its core. And now, there was no turning back. Ryland staggered under the weight of the shard's revelation. The memories it unleashed were fragments of countless lives, each one a story of manipulation and fear woven into the temple's foundation. Faces of acolytes, priests, and innocents flashed before his eyes, sometimes distorted, sometimes horrifyingly clear. The temple was not merely a place of worship, it was a vault of control, every memory stored to shape belief, obedience, and perception. He felt the Guardians closing in, but now their presence was different. They weren't just defending, they were testing his resolve, judging whether he could handle the truth. Ryland understood then that the temple's power was as much psychological as technological. The Guardians' forms flickered between shadow and light, each shift revealing fragments of their origin, data constructs modeled from the memories of priests and devotees long gone. A sudden realization struck him. The temple itself was alive, not in the biological sense, but as a consciousness built from collective human thought. Every secret, every lie, every belief had been absorbed, processed and stored. And it was aware of him now, measuring his intentions, weighing his worthiness to hold the knowledge it safeguarded. Rylan clenched the shard tighter. "I am not afraid," he muttered, though his voice trembled. "I will face it all." The Guardians advanced, testing his courage. Each step forward became a trial of perception. Hallways stretched impossibly. Glyphs shifted to show personal memories, fears, and desires. Rylan was forced to confront himself as much as the temple. His own doubts, the questions he had buried about faith and obedience, came to the surface. One guardian emerged, its form that of a child he recognized from his past, an echo of a memory the temple had twisted. "Do you remember?" it whispered, voice both familiar and alien. Rylan froze, feeling the weight of guilt and regret pressing upon him. He shook his head, refusing to let the temple manipulate him further. The shards around him pulsed, vibrating with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He realized that the only way forward was to accept the totality of what he now knew. The truth was both liberating and destructive. There could be no half measures. The temple demanded clarity, confrontation, and courage. He stepped deeper into the core, each motion deliberate. The Guardians' attacks were no longer physical. They were mental, probing memories, fears, and loyalties. Rylan focused, letting only his resolve guide him. Each mental strike he endured strengthened his understanding. Control, belief, manipulation, they were tools, not absolutes. A chamber opened before him, the final inner sanctum within the vault. It was smaller than he expected, intimate even, filled with a soft, ambient light. The central shard hovered above a pedestal of carved data, radiating both warmth and intensity. Around it, glyphs of every priest, every acolyte, and every manipulated memory converged, forming a swirling pattern of light and shadow. Rylan approached cautiously, knowing that touching it would bind him irrevocably to the temple's truth. He paused, taking a breath, and then extended his hand. The shard responded instantly, merging with his consciousness. A torrent of memories, knowledge, and emotions surged through him. He saw the rise and fall of faith, the manipulation of belief, and the hidden intentions of those who had built this place. Yet, amidst the chaos, he also saw beauty, the ingenuity, devotion, and sacrifices of countless individuals, even those who had been deceived. The temple was both monstrous and magnificent, a repository of humanity's light and shadow, simultaneously exposing its sins and preserving its legacy. Rylan's knees buckled as the weight of comprehension pressed upon him. He realized that he could not simply destroy or abandon the temple. The knowledge within was too vast, too dangerous to be left unchecked. He would have to become its guardian, its witness, and his conscience, ensuring that the lessons and truths it contained were used wisely, not as instruments of oppression. The Guardians, sensing his acceptance and understanding, receded. Their forms dissolved into streams of light, merging with the ambient glow of the sanctum. Ryland was alone, yet not lonely. The temple had acknowledged him as its counterpart, a human conduit for the truths it held. He stepped back from the pedestal, his mind racing with possibilities and responsibilities. The path forward was clear. He would leave the temple with its knowledge intact, but with a mission to guide those who sought the truth. He could not change the past, but he could influence the future, ensuring that the shadow of manipulation did not extend any further. As he turned to exit, the light of the inner sanctum dimmed, and the glyphs settled into quiet patterns, like a breathing entity at rest. Ryland felt the enormity of what he had witnessed, understanding that the Temple of Shadows was not just a place of secrecy and power, but a mirror of humanity itself, its flaws, its ingenuity, and its potential for both darkness and enlightenment. With determination, he stepped out of the chamber, ready to face the world outside, carrying the burden of knowledge and the responsibility to wield it with care. Rylan emerged from the inner sanctum, the temple's weight still pressing on his mind. Outside, the corridors were calm, yet the ambient light hinted at the restless consciousness of the place. Every shadow, every whisper of air seemed to carry a memory, a warning, or a secret waiting to be discovered. He understood now. The temple did not merely guard the past, it challenged those who dared enter to confront the truth of their own hearts. He paused at the threshold, remembering the countless faces the shard had shown him. Devotees, manipulators, innocents, and deceivers alike. Each life intertwined, forming a web of choice and consequence. The temple had revealed the spectrum of humanity, its capacity for creation and destruction, love and cruelty, faith and doubt. It had forced him to confront his own moral compass, to decide what he would become when the choices were stripped bare of illusion. Ryland began to walk the corridors toward the exit, guided by intuition as much as memory. The guardians were gone, replaced by a gentle glow that seemed almost encouraging, as if the temple itself approved of his path. He carried the shard in a protective case now, understanding that it was more than a tool. It was a responsibility, a key to knowledge that could uplift or ruin, depending on who wielded it. Every step reminded him of the trials he had faced, the distortions of memory, the confrontations with fear, the revelations of the temple's consciousness. It had not been easy. It had demanded honesty, courage, and clarity. Yet he felt stronger for it, sharper, more certain of who he was and what he could do. The temple's truth was heavy, but it was also liberating. It freed him from deception, from ignorance, from the complacency that had governed his life outside its walls. As he reached the outer gates, he paused to look back. The temple seemed to shimmer, its architecture both ancient and futuristic, a paradox of permanence and impermanence. He realized that leaving it behind physically did not sever the connection he now had. The knowledge, the memories, and the understanding he carried would remain with him, a living extension of the temple's consciousness, shaping his choices and perspective. Outside, the city awaited, a fractured landscape of neon, ruins, and survivors struggling to rebuild. Ryland stepped into the streets, aware of the delicate balance between hope and chaos. His mission was clear. He would share knowledge, guide without imposing, illuminate without controlling. The shard's insight gave him power, but with it came restraint. Every action now had weight. Every decision carried consequence. He moved cautiously through the remnants of the city, aware of those who might seek the shard's power for themselves. Corrupt officials, rogue technologists, and desperate scavengers could threaten the fragile equilibrium he hoped to maintain. But Ryland felt prepared. The temple had tested him, stripped him of illusions, and now his judgment was tempered by truth. He could navigate this world with a clarity that few possessed. At night, under the glow of flickering neon, he found a quiet place to rest. The shard lay beside him, pulsating softly, almost like a heartbeat. In that pulse, he sensed not danger, but connection, a dialogue between human and memory, between past and present, between knowledge and conscience. Sleep came slowly, haunted by visions of the lives he had witnessed, but also comforting in the certainty that he could carry the burden responsibly. Morning brought new resolve. He began documenting the insights he had gained, carefully recording histories, patterns, and warnings, ensuring that no lesson would be lost. He could not save everyone, but he could offer clarity, guidance, and protection. The temple had entrusted him with its secret, and he would honor it by nurturing understanding rather than fear. Through the days and weeks that followed, Rylan became a quiet guardian of knowledge. The shard remained with him, a link to the temple's consciousness, a reminder of the trials endured and the truths uncovered. Word spread of a man who carried insight and acted with wisdom, though few knew the full story of his journey. He understood that the Temple of Shadows would remain, a silent witness to humanity's flaws and potential. And he, as its human counterpart, would walk the path between memory and action, between truth and responsibility, ensuring that shadows illuminated rather than consumed. The city hummed around him, chaotic but alive, and Ryland moved forward, a solitary figure shaped by revelation, carrying the weight of knowledge with courage, wisdom, and hope.